Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM webinar series. During today's event, you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers along with today's broadcast will be published to our YouTube channel. Today's topic is broadcast best practices and troubleshooting, and Rodrigo Mercado will take us through this content. Over to you, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Greg. Well, this webinar is going to be about the broadcast best practices and troubleshooting. My name is Rodrigo, support for the smart reporting application. Let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to be having an overview, configuring and scheduling best practices, debug and monitoring, some troubleshooting, and of course references. So for the overview, the third-party reporting tool Yellowfin is integrated as smart reporting with some of our products like Remedy and TrueSight to create and manage reports. In time, the integration has improved to provide better processing and configurations for broadcast, so we want to show you the best practices and administration when scheduling to avoid performance issues and solve common issues. Moving on to configuration best practices, 2 notes for distributing broadcasting load is the first point. For large environments, we recommend 2 nodes in a cluster. The broadcast is a demanding process, so distributing the load in 2 servers helps. For the second point, adding scripts, cluster is highly configurable. Some modifications can be done to adapt to unusual balancing configurations. For the third point, the broadcast is going to send by default an email for each email account. However, this is going to also make it so that the report runs for each email. However, we can apply a parameter to the database in order to make it that the broadcast sends only 1 email and CCs everyone in the broadcast. That way the report is only going to run 1 time. We have a knowledge article for this process available in communities. Other than that, some common questions are: does smart reporting support secure FTP? Yes, it does. Another one is: can the broadcast reports be sent to an external email address? That means to an email address that is not part or associated with any user. And the answer is also yes. Another common question is, well, can we have conditional smart task? And we can. We're going to review these processes in a demo. Moving on to scheduling best practices. Let's start with the first point, limit number of users that can create broadcast. So the application has different roles for different activities. We don't want everyone to be able to create broadcast. It should be done by people that is aware of the resources and the capacity of the environment in order to avoid overload the process. Moving on, reduce run frequency. We normally don't recommend broadcast running every minute. We understand a few are necessary sometimes. However, the app is not an ETL and it won't be able to keep up feeding data to another application. For the third point, avoid running at the same time. Space out your schedules. For example, for a daily broadcast that is scheduled at 6 a.m., we don't want to have another one exactly at the same time. Maybe we want to schedule the second one at 6:05 and the third one at 6:10 and so on, giving it some time to process them one by one instead of all together. The fourth point is scheduling of peak hours. The broadcast use resources. So in order to avoid slowness or possible failures where the normal users are navigating the apps, we can schedule in less busy hours. Less busy hours will change depending in each company, or normally is early in the morning or on the weekends. For the last point, avoid scheduling reports that return a lot of data or more than 2 graphs. It is very common that big reports time out. So if you have that issue, the recommendation is to create a co-display report that is going to have 2 reports associated, or a deal true that is also an association, instead of having one big report. Also for the graphs, if you have 3 graphs in one report, that's going to be complicated to process. However, if you have 3 reports, each with one graph, is going to be a lot easier to process. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here we have debug and monitoring. When support gets cases for complex broadcast issues, we request to enable debug logs. So, a proactive action could be to provide them when there is a problem, or also, well, in general, they are going to give more information to identify the issues. We have a public knowledge article in communities in how to enable debug logs for broadcast. Now, for monitoring. The broadcast activity is a good way to detect issues early or avoid them. Yellowfin offers out-of-the-box reports for its metadata. We can use them to monitor that best practices are being followed and any local or global issues. Let's check them out in a demo. So for the first demo, we're going to be checking some of the best ways to monitor broadcast and some general configurations. Let's start with monitoring, going to administration and schedule management. We get this interface that is going to show all the background tasks. If it is gray, it has never run, red, fail, and blue, successful. If we click on it, we see more details. We can run the report to validate and check the history to see when a broadcast started failing. We can see the recipient list. Sometimes it's only going to fail for one recipient. And then we have a status. In this case, well, the SMTP server is unknown. It has a typo, so the application is not able to find it. However, sometimes this information is not going to be enough. We may want to get more details. So Smart Reporting has the option to report on all its metadata. We can report in users, reports, check the status of different objects. Here I have a dashboard for all the reports that are out of the box for broadcast. We can see some general information like the result of the broadcast, the recipient. We can see the type of broadcast, some date, and some graphs. However, let's say we want to get more detailed information. We can create our own content with whatever we want to report on. For that, we go to create a view. We select the Smart Reporting data source, multiple tables, and then create view. Now here we have the view builder interface. To the left, we see the list of all the tables. Right now I'm looking for task schedule. I know it has information related with all the background tasks. I want the report broadcast to be able to relate the task with the broadcast itself, and of course the report table in order to be able to relate the broadcast with the report. Let's say we don't know all the data. Well, we can go to view data and then we can see what we have available and what we may want. So first, I want the frequency. I want to know how often is being run to make sure best practices are being followed. Of course, the status, if the task succeeds or fails. And I also want an ID to be able to relate the task table with the broadcast table. Now we can go out of the data view and come back to the tables view. We're going to enable also some fields for the broadcast. I want, of course, I want to know the last person that modified the broadcast. That's relevant for some configurations, and of course the subject line. And finally, for the report, I want to know who the owner of the report is, and I want to know the report name. And now that we finish enabling the fields, we can start with the joins. So I'm going to select the schedule ID that I found before and relate it with the broadcast ID. Once we have the join, we can add and save. We can do outer or inner joins depending in the necessities or where we are looking for. For the second one, I know the broadcast table has a report ID. And of course, the report table also has the report ID. That's going to be our key field. And then again, we click add and save. So now our three tables are joined. There are different fields that could be useful for different situations, but for right now, we're going to take just check the simple case. So we save the view. We need to enter a name. And also we need to select a folder to where the view is going to be saved. And a simple save and publish. And we already have the view. So now we want to create a report for that view. So we're going to search for the view, filtering by views, and then type in the name. And we just right-clicking, we have the option to create a report. And now we have the report builder interface. To the left, we have all the fields that we enable. We just enable what we need, so let's get everything. For the IDs, the out-of-the-box format is going to be incorrect. So just let's remove the aggregation for both IDs. And we are going to also change the format. So we right-click the field, we get the drop-down format option, and then edit. We get formatting configurations. First, let's use a user-friendly label for the field, something that is easy to identify. Then we go to the format. We want reference code. Let's do the same for the IP owner field. So we go to format, edit. We can change the label of the field, and then the drop down in the format to reference code. Now that the format is ready, let's add a filter for the status. Right now I'm just interested in the broadcast that failed to be able to identify any problem. However, the report is not ready yet. The IDs of the broadcast owner and the report owner are not telling me anything. So we're going to do something that is called deal true. By selecting deal true, we enabled the related content tab. And in this tab, we can search for reports to relate. I selected the user details. It's a report I created. It's a custom report. However, it was created from the user audit view. Now I want to relate the report to the ID. That doesn't mean anything in itself, but by doing this configuration now, where my main report ID field is going to have a hyperlink that I'll be able to click. Right now I'm adding a second one for the IP owner ID. So I just want to see wherever I click, so I select as a master field the report owner, and of course the hyperlink also needs to go to the same field. So once that's ready, we can check out the design. I didn't hard-coded the filter, so it's going to be user prompt. We can just go to the magnifying glass icon to see the available options. And right now we are going to select only the failures. And click Go. Here we have the report. We see the IDs with a hyperlink, and now we can click on it and a Windows pop up. and we can see important details, right? Like the email address, if the user is active, the role of the user, and the organization of the user. We can add more information about the user. This is some basic stuff. However, for example, in a situation where the user that created the broadcast is no longer available, well, we won't be able to see this information, and we'll know there is an issue with that user. In general, we can see the status. It's giving us different error messages, like it could be a problem with a host, it could time out, it could be an access issue, or sometimes it's just going to give us a generic error message, and we need to get some extra information to identify the issue. So right now we are just going to save the report, enter in a name, and we are going to move on to some configurations for the broadcast in general. So the basic one, how to create a broadcast, is straightforward. We go to the main top menu, click the icon, we get the broadcast as the first option. We can select a user. However, we can have the option to use an external email address. We'll check it out later. For right now, let's move on to the second option in the broadcast menu. We can do a smart task. That is basically a broadcast. Is a broadcast to a smart reporting user, and is a conditional broadcast. So it's not always going to send the broadcast, only if a value of a field means a condition. So let's set the assignee, and we can select if we want to use current filters or just default filters. Now, in the alert menu, let's say I want to get the broadcast only when the broadcast report shows a value of failure. So set up the status to failure, and now we can go to the frequency. We can do it once a week, and it's only going to send me the broadcast if there is a failure with one broadcast. If everything is okay, I don't receive any broadcast, and I know everything is okay. However, if I do receive a broadcast, I can proactively check the problem and give a fast solution. We have as a last way of doing broadcast, the FTP broadcast. It's just a standard FTP configurations, host, directory, user, password. And well, now finally for this demo, we are going to check how to enable sending broadcast to users that are not part of Smart Reporting to an external email address. We just set up unsecure in the share menu, in the share settings, and that's it. Now we can send the broadcast to anyone. This concludes the demo. We have the troubleshooting guides in the documentation. There are a couple of broadcast scenarios. However, it's recommended to also search the community articles to get the full set of known issues. That said, let's review the most common issues. So for the first common issue, we're going to be reviewing these error messages, a timeout and an unknown host. These error messages are going to show in the schedule management interface and also in the status of the report we created in the first demo. It's normally going to be related with the SMTP server connection. In general, if there is an outage for the SMTP server, it's going to be normally communicated right away. So if you are seeing this and you have an outage, well, it's suspected, and once the outage is fixed, the broadcast should go back to normal. However, if there is no outage and you are seeing these error messages, there is likely that there is a problem with the configuration. of the application to connect to the SMTP server. So we have a knowledge article to review the configuration. It has a validation step to see the status. And also, let's review a demo about these configurations. Now, for this demo, we're going to review the SMTP connection. The application uses the SMTP connection to connect to an SMTP server in order to be able to distribute emails. Here we have the report, and we can see some of the most common issues is a timeout to the server and an unknown host. So in this situation, it's normally going to be a temporal outage, and it's only going to be some failures. However, in a scenario where all the broadcasts or most of the broadcasts are failing with these error messages, there may be an improper configuration in the application SMTP connections. In order to check this configuration, we need to log into the default organization and then go to administration and configuration. Here in configuration, in the main email option, we are going to see the outgoing mail server. This is only going to be available accessing from the client default. Here we can enter the parameters like the host. We can enter the port. It's going to be 25 if the default, if we don't enter anything. Authentication, the email size limit, and encryption. If we are having a problem with any of these parameters, there is going to be an explicit error message about it, like the port is incorrect, or the password of the authentication is not valid, or maybe the encryption is missing a certificate. We can actually validate the state of the SMTP connection in this test email option. We just enter an email address part of the SMTP, and then we're going to get a message that is going to give us the whatever issue we are having, right? For example, if we have an incorrect host, in this case it's not going to be able to find it. So it's important to, when we're having these error messages related to connection, to make sure we're using the correct host and the correct port, and that we're following best practices for authentication in the organization. This concludes the demo. So for the next common issue, we're going to be looking at duplicate broadcast. The problem is that we get a second email, or we see a second file in the FTP server when it should only be sending one. Of course, there is always a possibility that someone just schedule a second broadcast. So it's always good to verify the schedule management interface and make sure we don't have a second schedule. Now, if that's not the case, if we just don't see a second schedule, we may have a problem with the cluster configuration. First is make sure we are applying the proper scripts in the BMC documentation if we are using two nodes. However, if we already verified that, well, there may be a non-standard balancing configuration that requires a custom parameter. So we have this knowledge article where we show these parameters and some scenarios where we may need to apply these parameters in order to have a functioning cluster configuration for the background task. And the KA is also going to show you how to apply the parameters. So let's go ahead and review it in a demo. And now for this demo, we're going to be checking the two custom parameters for the cluster configuration that can help us with a common issue that is duplicate broadcast. Duplicate broadcast normally happens because the cluster is not able to coordinate properly between the two nodes. So each node sends the broadcast. Let's start with the BMC documentation. Here we see the cluster configuration script. This script is applied to the Tomcat web service. In most environments, this script is going to be enough to coordinate properly all the background tasks. However, if we have a non-standard balancing configuration, we may require some extra parameters to do it properly. In general, the cluster configuration is only recommended for large environments. Medium and small environments are able to handle the background task properly with a single node. However, for large environments, we do recommend 2 nodes in order to avoid any possible performance issues. The cluster configuration is applied at the server level. We modify the web.xml file. It's a Tomcat configuration file. The cluster is highly configurable. There are many different ways where we can set up the cluster. To check all that information, we can see the Yellowfin documentation for background task. Today we're going to be focusing in 2 parameters that can help us with the duplicate broadcast issue. First, we see the disable task scheduler. This parameter was part of the BMC documentation for any smart reporting version lower than 2002. For those versions, the background tasks are not able to be coordinated, so they are disabled in one node, and only the system tasks are coordinated in both servers. We can apply also this parameter in 2002 or newer version in case we want to work around in the meantime we identify any issue. Now, for the main parameter that is going to be solving the issue is the disable task scheduler pooling. This parameter is going to force one slave node and therefore making the other node a master. All the background tasks are going to be coordinated in the master node, and the master node is able to take resources from both nodes. This way we avoid any communication in the commands problems. Now, in how to apply a parameter to the cluster configuration, well, let's check the documentation carefully. We see here that the documentation is telling us to apply the parameter in the MyStartup server block in the web.xml. Now, to find the web.xml, we can go back to the BMC documentation. We can see that for bundle Tomcat, we use the path above, and for external Tomcat, we use the one below. From 2002 forward, all the versions of Smart Reporting are only external Tomcat, unless it was an upgrade from an older version. Then you may have a bundle Tomcat still with a new version. So let's search for the blog. The easiest way to do it is with the keyword MyStartup. If we go to the document and search for it, it's going to show right away. I already have it open here, but I mean, that's going to show as the first keyword for MyStartup. Here we see the start of the servlet, the name, the class, and then we start seeing the list of parameters. This block has information regarding the cache and other report properties, JDBC properties. Here we see the end of the block. We can apply the parameter anywhere in the list of the parameters as long as is outside any other parameter. So here I apply the parameter after one parameter ends and before the other one begins. Then we restart the service and the parameter is applied. This concludes the demo. Now for the next common issue, we are going to be reviewing the scenario where the broadcast is not able to run because there is a problem with the report or the relationship to the report. Of course, if the report is not working, the broadcast won't run, and it's normally going to show us an error message related with a problem with the report, like error retrieving results. In that scenario, we need to identify the report that is having the problem and try to troubleshoot whatever problem it has. Once the report is working again, the broadcast should be back in operation. Another scenario could be where the report is working fine, but we are still getting some error message related to not able to run as a generic message, or some error related with not being able to run the report. In that scenario, the database stores the reference where the broadcast is able to identify and run a report. If that reference is missing or corrupted, then the broadcast is not going to be able to run. In most cases, this is very simple to fix. We just need to recreate the broadcast, and it's going to create a new relationship, maybe to a new version of the report, and is going to be able to run properly after that. However, there could be some situations where there is a global issue and all reports are getting these problems. So in that case, there could be some other issue with a connection to the data source or with a corruption in the database. For global issues where everything is failing, it's recommended to create a case with BMC. However, for the smaller cases where it is only one or two broadcasts not working, in that scenario, it's recommended to identify the content with the problem and try to recreate it. Finally, we have a similar scenario for another common issue, but this time related to the relationship of the broadcast with the user. The broadcast is going to have a field that is called the last modifier. That means the user that last modified the broadcast, and the broadcast is going to use the email of that user. So therefore creating a dependency of that user. In case we have a corrupted user, a missing reference, or just a user that is no longer active, that is set as the last modifier of the broadcast, the broadcast may fail with a null pointer exception or with a generic not able to run a report error message. So for this problem, of course, the issue is that the user has some situation. For that, we can use another user to edit or recreate the broadcast. That should be enough. We can create a report using the metadata audit reports in order to identify if more than one user or more than one broadcast is in this situation. However, in general, it's recommended to avoid using a user, and we can do that by going to the configurations and setting a dedicated email to send a broadcast. We're going to be reviewing a last demo where we are going to go over some ways to identify problems with broadcast missing a relationship to a report or missing a relationship to a user. Okay, for the next demo, we're going to take a look at more broadcast failures. This time we're going to check the scenario where the user is missing. The user modified the broadcast or created the broadcast and is no longer part of the organization, so it's not going to be able to run. We are also going to take a look at a scenario where the report has been deleted or where the report is corrupt. So we have here the schedule management, and we have two broadcasts that fail. For these situations, sometimes it's going to give us a generic error message. An error occurred, and it's not telling us specifically what happened. However, we can see in the second one, the owner of the broadcast is unknown, that's an indication that there may be a problem. If we go to the history and the recipient list, well, we can know at what time it started failing. However, sometimes that information may not be enough to identify the issue. So for that, we are going to go to the report that we created in a previous demo. As a reminder, this report is associating the broadcast information with the report information with the user information. These relationships are the same ones that the application uses for the operation. So if we identify some issue here, well, it may be related with some problem in general. Let's check it out the report. We are going to add a filter, the failure filter. We just want to see fail broadcast. And the top ones are the ones that we were looking at in the schedule management interface. We see that the error message is generic. It's still not helping us to identify the issue. However, we start seeing some situation for the second broadcast. We don't have a report name and we don't have a report owner. So that's an indication that there are missing references. The broadcast is not able to find the report name and is not able to find the owner of the report. This situation can happen when there are intermittent disconnection to the database. When the database connection is unstable, there could be data corruption. We have a workaround in the community's articles to attempt many connections to get more stability. However, in general, it's just better to troubleshoot the connection issues from the application server to the database server. Now, for the first broadcast, we notice that that one still has a name. However, that report has been deleted. The difference is that this was deleted at the interface properly, so the relationship is still there, even if the report is in a deleted state. For that situation, in some scenarios, the report can be recovered. In some others, the report may need to be recreated. For the corruption issue, sadly, we can only roll back the database to a previous state where the data was not corrupted, or we can also recreate the content. Now, we also noticed for the second broadcast that the user was unknown, the owner of the broadcast. So let's check out the users first. For the first broadcast, we see the user is there, everything is okay. However, if we take a look at the second ID, the one that we saw that was unknown, well, it's not giving me any results. The reference is no longer there. What happened here is that the user was deleted from remedy, and well, there is no more someone to run the report broadcast, so the broadcast fails. In general, the recommendation is to recreate the report. However, we can avoid that situation entirely by removing the dependency to the user for sending broadcast. We can go to administration, configuration, general settings, and in here we see the broadcast email address. This parameter is going to, in this parameter we can set up a dedicated email address that is going to be used to send broadcast, and that way we can avoid the dependency from a user to send a broadcast. And that concludes the demo. Okay, that's all the content we have for today. Here we see the references. It's important to check the BMC documentation. The Yellowfin is the software of smart reporting documentation. And we have a lot of knowledge articles in communities to solve common issues. Also recommended to go there. As a summary, the broadcast scheduling process can create performance issues. Therefore, it's important to verify best practices when scheduling and verifying proper configurations. Common issues are normally related to cluster configuration, missing references to content or users, and connection issues between servers. Monitoring the process by using reports is an easy way to make sure best practices are being followed and a fast way to identify issues with the broadcast. So this concludes the presentation. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you. And now I'll take us through the self-help in contacting BMC. The YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted is listed here. It contains past webinars as well as a rich set of how-to videos. The Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar schedule is available at this community's link. As always, contacting technical support via web, phone, email, and these social channels is available. At this time, that will conclude this webinar. Thank you for attending.